Okay, g'day everybody. I'm here today with Professor Daniel Reynaud, and we're here to talk about his book, Sailor, Soldier, Vicar, Farmer, The Improbable Life of ANZAC Chaplain Walter Dexter. So, hello Daniel, how are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
So, who was Walter Dexter?
He is our most decorated chaplain, talking about Australian chaplain, not just of the First World War, but of any war. He's the one who served on the front line for longer than anybody else and really carved out a very, very distinguished career that deserves to be better known.
Okay. And how did you come across him?
So I've been researching the spiritual lives of the Anzacs now for 20, 25 years. And I've done it primarily through reading diaries. I've read the diaries and letters of over 1,300 soldiers now. And it became evident from reading sources that this guy was significant. His diaries were also held in the War Memorial, and I was able to find relatives who held other documents. So he really stood out as one of the great Anzacs.
So, we'll get to his military career in a moment, but what can you tell us about him before he joined up? Because obviously he's a sailor and a soldier and a vicar and a farmer and everything else. What,
Yeah, look,
what
he
was he
had an
doing before the war?
extraordinary diversity of careers. So, age 14, he's born in near Birkenhead in England. Age 14, signs up for the Merchant Marine, sails around the world, various adventures as just a teenager. And then in 1900, decides he wants to volunteer for an Indian horse unit that's going to fight in the Boer War. He'd always dreamt of riding the Wild West in America, and this was his opportunity. It was the wild, but
Yeah.
South Africa. I still haven't figured out how a sailor learnt how to ride a horse well enough to persuade a horse unit to accept him. But he had a bit of the gift of the gab, so that probably got him across the line.
Okay, fair enough. So he actually served in South Africa.
Served in South Africa in Lumsden's Horse. They were a scouting unit, very similar actually to many of the Australian horse units that fought in the Boer War. In fact, Banjo Patterson, who was a war journalist, did a lecture tour around Australia, talking not about the Australian horse units, but about Lumsden's horse. They really
Okay,
carved out a wonderful reputation. And Dexter carved out a reputation because he was one of only five of the 300 strong unit who was decorated for bravery.
okay.
So he wins the Distinguished Conduct Medal. We're not exactly sure what for, but most probably for climbing a telegraph pole and cutting all the wires while under fire from Boer sharpshooters.
That'll do it.
But scrambling up a pole isn't that
Yeah,
difficult if you've got sailor experience.
yeah, true. Sure, he would have been good for it. So,
Yeah,
just the Boers sniping out makes it a bit difficult, though.
true, true. And he was singled out as one of those. The colonel said, "These five men are my best men. If I ever want anything done, I pick one of them."
Okay, very good. So after the Boer War, what's he do?
Uh, well, he goes back to sailing. He's qualified as an officer in the Merchant Marine, as a mate, and he actually qualifies as a sea captain and becomes a sea captain, and mainly in the Indian Ocean, often taking Muslim pilgrims from India to Mecca in Saudi Arabia now, and he makes an absolute fortune. He's earning £5,000 plus a year, which was a terrific income back then.
Yeah.
He meets a Mauritian girl, falls in love, they marry. Tragically, she dies a year later in childbirth. And after a little bit, he starts thinking, is there more to life than making lots of money and having adventure?
Mhm.
So he goes back to England and studies for the Anglican priesthood. Then he spends a year or two as a priest working with the Hull fishing fleet. Obviously, with his background, he was an ideal, minister for that group of people. And then he got an invitation to go to Wonthaggi in Victoria. It was a brand new pioneering coal mining town. They'd just opened the place. Everybody lived in tents, including the new vicar.
Yep.
And his church was a tent as well, 2 tents side by side. So really, frontier stuff.
Yeah. He's gone from a nice, comfortable English parish to living in a tent out back. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
And we know how he felt about that?
Look, he loved it. He had this sense of adventure that drove him for pretty well all his life. And when he arrives there, another Anglican minister writes to him and says, listen, my niece is coming to this town to teach. And, her mum's a bit worried. She's brand new, fresh out of uni. Would you mind just sort of keeping an eye on her? And he did that quite literally.
Okay.
It was love at first sight on both parts. And 15-year age gap. He's in his mid-30s. She's early 20s. But, yeah. And a couple of years later, they were married. And it was one of those really sweet, romantic marriages all their lives.
Okay.
They were very devoted to each other. Yeah.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah. Okay. So how long was he there for?
So he's in Wonthaggi and then South Melbourne for about 4 years, and then World War I breaks out. So he volunteers in the first batch of clergymen as a chaplain.
Okay. Okay. So for those who don't really understand, what is the role of a military chaplain? As opposed to a secular, not a secular one, a civilian chaplain.
Yes. So back then there were 2 jobs and no training and no induction. Your job was to take the compulsory church services, what they called church parade every Sunday, and to bury the dead. Everything else, you made it up on the spot, in collaboration with the battalion colonel. Like I said, there was no training, there was no induction, nobody knew anything. The colonels were as ignorant of the roles of chaplains as the chaplains were. Now, of course, some chaplains had experience. They were militia chaplains or had served in the Boer War. Dexter served in the Boer War, but not as a chaplain. He served as a soldier. So, he signs up and he's assigned to the 5th Battalion, which was a Victorian battalion. Yeah.
Okay, so he's with the 5th. Okay. And so he goes through all the training. So he's got to do sort of the military training himself as well as looking after the new soldiers as well, doesn't he? Yes.
So chaplains didn't have to do any of the drills. If they were super minimalist, they turned up on Sunday morning, preached their sermon, and then waited for someone to die. But, that would be an extraordinarily rare chaplain. Most of them said, here's my chance to engage with the battalion and do a whole lot of kind of social welfare activity that the army just hadn't thought of catering for. So, for instance, they will run concerts. They will organise sports days for the battalion. They will act as the treasurer for the officers' mess because, hopefully a church minister's reliable with the funds. So it was up to them. And Dexter has got a unique background and a fabulous set of skills to actually get alongside soldiers and get to know them. So he'd go out on the training marches. Didn't have to, but he would, especially in Egypt, the tough overnight marches. And then in the evening, he'd sit around and just yarn with 2 or 3 men and just move around and build that relationship. And the entertainments they provided were really important because when they got to Egypt, the army hadn't thought, what will the soldiers do when they're not in training? And obviously they're not in training 24/7. And with a dearth of things to do, they went into Cairo. And because the officers had monopolised all the best places, officers only. This meant that the rank and file could only go to the cheap and nasty wine bars where the alcohol was, badly tainted stuff. Who knew what they put in it? And of
Yeah.
course, the notorious brothel district of Waza in Cairo.
Yeah.
So Dexter's one of the chaplains who says, the army has made a mistake here. Let's put on things for the soldiers so that in their spare time, they don't get so bored they wander down to these places.
Yeah. So he was sort of understanding of the fact that these young blokes from Australia now found themselves in this exotic country and they're wanting to sample the wares, so to speak. He's aware of all this sort of thing, being an old soldier himself.
He's not only an old soldier, he's an old sailor.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
So he knows this. He knows this backwards, And one of the things that made him so accepted by the soldiers was the fact that he wasn't moralistic. He understood the temptations. He understood the issues at hand. As a sailor himself, he devised ways of mixing with his fellow sailors who were, bending the elbow heavily, but without him getting drunk.
Mm-hmm.
And so he knew how to mix with people, but not, drink himself silly.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
he lacks that wowser quality that a lot of the soldiers suspected that chaplains would have. In fact, very few of the chaplains were wowsers. I've done a lot of work on chaplains. I've got another biography of a chaplain that I did about 10 years ago, fighting Mac Mackenzie, the Salvationist. And, that's another absolutely amazing story. And these chaplains were hugely popular, extremely well known to the soldiers, but we've forgotten them.
Yep. Yeah, it's not a part of the army that you hear a great deal about, particularly in wartime. But
Where do you fit a chaplain into the ANZAC legend?
yeah, it's
The ANZAC
yeah,
legend's a young bushman, larrikin, hard drinking, gambling. He's not very well disciplined, but he's a fabulous fighter, resourceful. Where does a chaplain fit in that? A goody two-shoes church minister. And of course, most of the chaplains weren't goody two-shoes. They were real men. They were active and engaged and present. A number of them were killed. Quite a number, a disproportionate number, won decorations for bravery, including Dexter. So after the training at Egypt, he goes to Gallipoli with the men.
Yep. So does he land with the 5th Battalion or does he come after the landing?
He did his best to land with the 5th Battalion. In fact, he wanted to land with the 3rd Brigade,
Okay.
which was the 1st Brigade to land.
Yep.
He was in the 2nd Brigade. And he
Okay.
did his devious best. Dexter might be a clergyman, but he's got charm and charisma and a certain level of deviousness without being, immoral. He's just got the
Yep.
knack of getting things done. And I'm going to come to that soon.
Yep.
But he did his best to land with the first wave. And the general said, no, you're not even landing with the second wave. So instead, he stayed on board ship. And it was lucky that he did, because as a sea captain, he was his own chief medical officer.
Okay. So, yes, he would have
He
been there as the wounded start coming back on board, wouldn't he?
Absolutely. Now, their job as a chaplain, it was supposed to be at the first aid post, where they would, pray with the wounded and comfort them and give them drinks of coffee or whatever. But Dexter actually had a repertoire of amateur medical skills. He'd set broken legs. He'd dosed sailors for this and that and the rest of it. So he actually wasn't bad. And the soldiers kind of thought of him as a spare doctor.
Okay.
So he actually spent the first few days on board the hospital ship that only had 2 doctors that's dealing with hundreds of patients. And at the end, one of them said, mate, you deserve the Victoria Cross, what you've done. We wouldn't have coped without you here.
Yeah. Does he mention those days in his diary a great deal, or
Does he mention, sorry?
does he mention those days, those first few days in his diary?
Absolutely. Look, they were horrific. He talks about the wounded coming, and he wanted to bubble and cry. They were just, so badly done.
Mm-hmm.
Yet he would laugh and joke with them to try and lift their spirits. And they always wanted him to treat the guy next to them first. And he's tearing bandages off men that have gone, the blood stiffened the bandage. So it's an extremely painful thing for him to take off. Or they got wounded and were out in the open for a day or two and are horribly sunburnt. So when you pull the bandage off comes, great strips of skin. And I mean, soldiers were traumatized because they were wounded, but that's traumatic to deal with yourself. In fact, one of the first boats to come to his hospital ship had his wife's cousin dead in the bottom of it.
Oh, no. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
that would not be a good time to be on board ship. You don't hear
No,
much about that side of it either, do you?
no. And when he went ashore, he was greeted by the 5th Battalion, and they just poured out of the trenches to come and greet him because many of the wounded had gone back and told them what he'd done. So he was already a hero.
Yep.
But
Yep.
he starts a routine. In the morning, he's with the people in hospital, and then he walks up Shrapnel Gully in Monash Valley up to the ridges where the trenches are, and he just walks through the trenches, spends 10, 15 minutes with each little group of men, encouraging them, telling jokes, keeping their spirits up. When he would go up, he'd carry supplies, cigarettes, water. When he came down, he'd help with the wounded. And that's how he spent his days. His nights were largely spent in funerals. They did the funerals at night because it was safer from Turkish shrapnel fire. Not completely immune, but safer. So he could be up till 2, 3, 4 in the morning conducting funerals.
Yep.
So it was a tough life.
Yep. So he was on the peninsula for the duration?
He was. He had a very short break on Lemnos, but much less than any other chaplain. Now, in theory, every battalion had a chaplain, but they had to pull some of the chaplains out of the battalions to staff the hospital full of wounded. And then other chaplains came down with dysentery and had to be evacuated. So there was a point where there was only one other ANZAC chaplain in the enclave. And he said to that chaplain, right, you take the left half, I'll take the right half. And they did that till a third chaplain came along. In fact, at one point, he was the only chaplain for the 1st Division. And every now and then, the 2nd Division would call him in to do some of their funerals as well. So incredibly busy. And something we don't think about, but, a guy in a platoon, he'll lose mates either side of him and attend the funeral and help dig the grave. And that is tragic. The chaplain has to deal with all the dead and many of the wounded. And often it was the chaplain who dragged the body out of no man's land and then searched the pockets of the corpse to get all the personal effects off, and then wrote an inventory of it, then wrote a letter to the family giving details, and then the family would write back and he would answer that. Now, you're talking about doing that for hundreds and hundreds of men. So while the soldiers were constantly confronting death, it was on a much smaller scale than what the chaplains had to do. The chaplains are constantly dealing with grief and with death. And as you know, in warfare, death is not a clean thing. It's messy, it's ugly, it's smelly, it's horrific. So the level of strain that they're under is in some ways greater than the ordinary soldier, especially as the average soldier would spend most of their time in the trenches, which is about the safest place to be. The dangerous place was walking up and down. Now, soldiers were allocated, duties carrying the water and supplies and other things, and that was always dangerous. But the chaplain is doing that all the time. It's always the same chaplain. You can't rotate the chaplains.
Yeah.
So, at Gallipoli, the chaplains were right in the thick of it.
Which raises
And
an
none more
interesting
than Dexter.
question. If the chaplains are there looking after the troops, who's looking
Yes,
after the chaplains?
that's a superb question. And the answer is nobody.
Nobody.
You see, they hadn't recognised war trauma. They invented the term shell shock in the First World War because they thought that an exploding shell did something to your soul. They hadn't understood all of that at all. And it's not until mid-war that they're actually recognising that they shouldn't be court-martialing men who've got shell shock. They twigged to that when guys with military crosses and Victoria crosses fled from battles. And they go, well, this guy can't be a coward.
Yeah.
Someone like Dexter, who's constantly on the front lines, no, there was no care for them. Dexter's an interesting case because he instinctively knew how to take small holidays.
Mm. Yep.
So if he had half a day with no obvious duties and the opportunity to just put his feet up, he'd do that. He was always on call if there was a need, but he just knew how to pace it a little bit. Nevertheless, one of the soldiers said to him, Padre, when do you ever stop? And Dexter thought about that for a moment and he thought, no, I don't, do I?
Yeah, that was very interesting. So obviously he's, for the first few months, it's fairly routine sort of trench fighting going on in Gallipoli. And then we come to the August offensive.
That's right.
The 5th Battalion, they would have been at Lone Pine?
Yes, exactly. So they're the reserves. It's the 1st Brigade that attacks, and the 1st Brigade includes William Mackenzie, the Salvo chaplain, who at some point in the night crossed no man's land under heavy fire and was sorting the living from the dead in the middle of the battle.
Oh, wow.
Dexter's unit is held back, and they're fed into the battle 2 or 3 days later. And Dexter goes with them too, and he's in the trenches sorting the living from the dead, because they were stacked 2, 3, 4 bodies high, and you couldn't walk without walking on bodies. And Dexter was in the horror of all that, and he recounts having to walk on, ground that was soggy under your feet because it was a body, or you take a step and there's this wheezing noise that comes out as you expel the air from a corpse. And it took several days after the battle had finished before they were able to get over that. And he said he was at the point where he was dreaming at night of endless bodies and endless funerals.
Yes, it would take its toll.
It would. But his work at Lone Pine and his leadership there led to the award of the Distinguished Service Order, which, as you know, is either for leadership or valour. And when it's valour, it's usually you just missed out on the Victoria Cross.
Yeah, sounds like it. Yeah, because the fighting went on for about a week, so he would have been up there while it was still bombs are being thrown and
that's it. That's it. And heavy
made
machine gun fire across no man's land, and walking along trenches where they were throwing the corpses out of the trench onto the parapet, and they'd toss a body out and an arm would fall down. So every time you walk past, this arm would grab you as you went by, and within a few days, that body is a reeking, writhing mess of maggots. The horror was literally indescribable, and Dexter's one of those who says there are no words to describe what we went through.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, boggles the mind, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah. So after the August offensive, it all dies down. We're sort of starting to look about evacuation. Does he give a hint of what goes through his mind, having been through all that, and then to leave?
He's devastated, absolutely, utterly devastated. His brain gets it. It's a militarily sound thing to do, but he's appalled at the cost in lives and just walking away and leaving them there. Now, one of the things Dexter did, he'd gone over the entire peninsula. Being a Navy man, a good navigator, he'd actually mapped every single Australian grave.
Okay.
And when you come to post-war and the establishment of the War Graves Commissions, they used Dexter's map to be able to consolidate the graves that we now see on Gallipoli and visit. They're his handiwork. Not only that, he beautified them. He would tidy them up. He'd organise for the graves to be in rows. He had soldiers paint stones with whitewash from the ships and put around the graves. He organised a group of men to create white wooden crosses with the names painted on them. And that meant so much to the soldiers. I mean, even soldiers who didn't care about religion at all, the fact that Dexter took so much care over those who died, their dead mates, that made him stand out. He was special.
Yeah. Okay. And when did he leave the peninsula? Was he one of the first to go or one of the last?
He was one of the last, and he actually intended not to go at all. He actually asked for permission to stay behind and tend the graves under Turkish occupation. And the general said, "No, you're coming."
No.
And he was devastated. He waited till the absolute last minute to leave. And as he left, he scattered Australian wattle seed that he'd soaked in water for 24 hours all through the cemeteries because he wanted these men to sleep in the shade of their native trees. It was a beautiful idea. It didn't work. There are no Australian wattles on Gallipoli.
Oh, it would have been nice if it did work.
Would have been. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so after Gallipoli, obviously they go back to Egypt, regroup.
Back to Egypt, and he's now put in charge of chaplaincy for the 1st Division and then eventually the ANZAC Corps. So it's his job to organise. I don't know if you know much about how chaplains were organised, but in order to prevent rivalry between the different religions, each religion had a head chaplain who made all the appointments.
Okay.
And they were appointed according to a ratio. So each brigade had 2 Anglicans, 1 Catholic, and 1 either Presbyterian or Methodist. And occasionally they'd swap out one of the Anglicans for what they called other Protestant denominations. So Salvation Army, Baptist, Churches of Christ, that sort of thing. But in terms of organising, they had to have 1 chaplain who allocated these different chaplains to jobs. That chaplain didn't tell them what to do, but just made sure that they were well distributed. And that's the role that Dexter gets. It's a leadership role, and he manages it very well under extremely difficult circumstances. And then the divisions leave for France, and he's accumulated all of his leave on purpose because his wife and baby son, who was just a few months old when he signed up, sailed from Australia to Egypt, and he just has this couple of weeks holiday showing her around all the sites of Egypt before they go on to France, and then she moves on to England.
So he goes to France with the AOF, with the 1st Division.
Yes, 1st Division, and
so
then
he's now higher than battalion level. He's gone up. He's at divisional
he's
level.
at division and then corps level. So he's the senior chaplain for the corps. And again, no authority over non-Anglicans except to say, would you please fill this hole and that hole? And would you please make sure that you get your monthly reports in? And, all the painful administrivia.
Yep.
And then he was promoted to be the senior chaplain for the whole AIF based in London. So he got on very well with General Birdwood. He had the knack of mixing with the common soldier and with the generals. It didn't matter. He had that kind of personality.
Yeah. So how do you feel going from a sort of hands-on chaplaincy role with the soldiers to a more administrative side of things? Did he still get to the troops?
He didn't mind, because even when he was at divisional corps level, he would attach himself to troops. For instance, he wouldn't attach himself to divisional or corps HQ. He would attach himself to the corps cyclists or the corps engineers or something like that.
Yep.
And whenever he wasn't in his office doing paperwork, he was out with the men. And with his job in London, he intended to return to France as often as possible and get around and visit the chaplains, because he said, how else would I know what they need if I'm not there? But
Okay.
2 months after his appointment, he resigned.
Okay.
What had happened was the senior Anglican, Catholic, Presbyterian and Methodist chaplain showed up from Australia. And they got this battlefront tour. In fact, it was Dexter who showed them. And he had such a blast because, the Catholic and the Presbyterian guys were a bit of loggerheads. And both of them were at loggerheads with the Anglicans because they thought the Anglicans were trying to monopolise things. And it's an Anglican, Dexter, who gets to show them around. And at one stage, there's shrapnel falling out of the sky, and they're all looking a bit worried. He's an old salt. He's not scared. He says, okay. And he gets them to hide in this little nook, and they all have to press together these 3 different religions. He says, this is fantastic. This is what religion should be like. We all just get on. Anyway, they were worried that the Anglicans were doing a takeover. And Dexter says, this is stupid. One person can do this organisational job without interfering with the roles of the denominations. But you want 4 people to do it, 1 for each major denomination. So he resigned in a huff and he went back, not to the corps level, but to divisional level. And again, he appointed himself to division troops. And the interesting thing is, at divisional level, because he wasn't attached to a battalion that got rotated through the trenches, probably on a 1 month to 2 month basis. So troops only spent a third of their time in the trenches, and only a quarter of that third was in the front line, because there was also the second line and the reserve trenches. So you've got these rotations. So chaplains with battalions probably spent about a third of their time under fire. Dexter, he can go wherever he likes. He's his own boss. So he goes to the trenches on a regular basis, especially if there's a battle on. He heads straight there, and he's going to the chaplain saying, how can I support you? He's heading into no man's land under fire, bringing in wounded, carrying in the dead. One stage, his dugout is hit by artillery fire, and the little ammunition dump just outside explodes. He jumps out and starts pulling unexploded ordnance out of it so that it's not more dangerous. I mean, you'll know how dangerous that is.
Yeah.
And there he is doing it.
Yeah.
So I've estimated that he spent more than 50% of his time actually in the trenches, which is more than any individual soldier in the AIF did.
It's not too bad. So when was it that he went back to divisional level?
So he's senior AIF chaplain in December, January 1916, 1917. And then he sends himself back to the front line. And he would nip home to England occasionally and visit his wife and his growing family. He has 3 more kids while he's during the war.
Yep.
And again, that was just knowing how to soothe his soul so that he could continue giving. But if there was a battle in the offing, he would write to his wife and say, sorry, I was planning to come. I'm not moving. There's no way I'm leaving the boys.
Yeah. So he's back at the division at probably the hardest year for the AIF, with Bullcore and Passchendaele and all those massive battles of 1917.
So he gets the Military Cross in 1917 for his participation in broadside and men in battles. And again, he just worked himself into the ground. He was at the aid station. He didn't sleep for 2 nights straight. He's bringing up supplies, that sort of thing. Now, there are 2 other things actually I should mention that made him into a legend. First of all, he had the knack for acquiring stuff in the best military tradition.
Yep.
The AIF was a miracle of logistics if you think about it. How do you keep 300,000 men supplied on the other side of the world? And they did a pretty good job of it. But at the individual level, the unit level, quite often it failed. Dexter, I mean, the staff of the First Division had this joke that he could go out in his shirt and shorts in the morning and come back with enough equipment for an entire corps. He just and somebody so admired his capacity to meet the needs of the soldiers that they actually wrote a poem about him, and it was called The Pinching Padre. And it became quite a legendary poem. He was incredibly proud of being called the pinching Padre. That was his favourite nickname. And he was really good at it. He was just had this knack of knowing where to find stuff. I mean, that's the ultimate ANZAC quality, isn't it?
Yeah, pretty much.
So he would acquire stuff. He also started canteens not behind the lines, but in the trenches themselves. And he started off at Hellfire Corner, one of the most dangerous places on the Western Front, setting up a canteen under fire where soldiers coming in and out of the trenches, particularly the winter of 1916-17, which was the worst for, 40 or 50 years. And that made such an unbelievable difference to morale. Soldiers could grab a hot cup of coffee or tea or soup as they're going into the trenches, or, coming out muddy and wet and cold. And he started this right across the brigade and then the division. And in fact, they were so successful that the entire British Army copied him.
Okay.
So that's influence. Then the next thing he did was he started cinemas behind the lines for soldiers coming out. And he would go to Paris on a regular basis to buy more cinema machines and more movies. And again, he'd go there and he'd take the afternoon off and do a little bit of sightseeing around Paris. And the soldiers who came with him to manhandle the equipment, he'd say, take a half day off, go and relax. He knew how to do that. And it meant that, unlike Mackenzie, for example, who ran himself into the ground and was useless for most of 1917, they had to send him home. He was just too sick to continue. Mm-hmm. Dexter lasted beyond the entire war, continuing this service to the troops, not just running church services and religious meetings that were extremely influential to the men. You can't underrate those. But also looking after their physical and emotional needs as well, with the canteens and the movie nights and the concerts and the sports that he ran. Yeah. And continuing his work with cemeteries.
Yep. So he still went around the battlefields after the battles have moved on and yes. Identified graves and
he's mapping them, and he handed over. So the AIF had no war graves section, and it's not till halfway through the war that they think to invent such a thing. And he simply handed over all of his plans from Gallipoli and said, here's your template. This is how you need to do it. So they followed his template. When you put all of those things together, his frontline service, his spiritual ministry to soldiers who, are facing death on a daily basis, his work with the canteens and the cinemas and the cemeteries, the funerals that he takes, the thousands of families that he wrote to with letters of comfort. That's a huge, huge contribution. And there isn't a chaplain who could match his level of service. And there's virtually not a soldier who could match his amount of time in the trenches.
Which is, it's very impressive, isn't he? So in 1918,
yes.
So you've got the Spring Offensive and Village Reynaud yes. and all that sort of stuff.
Yes.
Does he give an idea of how his feelings when the British Fifth Army collapses and it's looking a bit dicey?
The funny thing is, for a man who's only spent 4 years in Australia, is how Australian his outlook is. He writes against these British units that don't have the backbone that we Aussies do, and it's really curious how much he identifies with the Australians. Yeah. Um, and during that time, I mean, he's at his absolute best because most of those battlefields of 1918, either the British in retreat or when they're advancing in the 100 Days, it's over fresh ground. It's over villages that have just been evacuated or just liberated. The civilians aren't there. And the soldiers have got their pick of the very best of the shops and the cellars and the fields, you know. And
Yeah.
Dexter's in his prime. He'll take pianos from ruined houses and use them for his concerts. And oh yeah, he really knew how to do it. He actually amazed the Salvage Corps because he turned up one day with a truck of champagne that he handed over to the Salvage Corps. And they were shocked beyond belief. Here's an Australian soldier who's handing over alcohol. What they didn't know was almost certainly Dexter had already taken his cut.
Good to
But he
see.
did it because he knew the Aussie soldiers would just get drunk.
Yep.
And that was his way of, you know, trying to moderate their drinking habits.
Yep. Without sermonising to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, on
Okay.
Gallipoli, he occasionally would sneak a beer down to some men who couldn't access any.
Yeah.
And he knew that there'd be other chaplains who were, you know, teetotalers who would be upset with that. He didn't mind drinking, but he just didn't drink to excess.
Yep. Oh, very good. So, where is he when the war finishes?
He's actually in Paris getting some more cinema stuff. And he
Okay.
sees the celebrations in the streets and he goes, I just can't handle this. It's too French. There's too much exuberance. And so he goes back to his good old British Australians with their stiff upper lips
Yep.
and just celebrates quietly with them. He stays on after the war. He's appointed entertainments officer because you've got tens of thousands of troops with no purpose anymore. They just want to go home. They've got nothing to do. This is when they're most likely to get into deep trouble.
Yep.
His uncle-in-law, the man who wrote him the letter to go and meet the young
Yep.
teacher, he's the senior AIF education officer. And so education officer, entertainments officer, they work together. So Dexter makes sure that there are concerts and sports events and other activities for soldiers in England. And he makes sure every ship has got a piano, has got movies, has got sports equipment that they can use during the voyage, that kind of thing.
Yep.
And he does that till 1920. He only comes home in 1920.
Mm. So to have him as one of the last to come home as well.
That's right. So you're talking about length of service, unmatched in the chaplaincy. You're talking about length of frontline service, unmatched in the chaplaincy and probably amongst soldiers as well. You're talking about quality of service. Nobody surpassed him. I mean, there were others who probably were as rich in what they gave. It's really an extraordinary story and one that deserves to be in the front line of our ANZAC memory.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I mean, I'm not a religious person, but I thought I'd like to have met the bloke by the sound of it.
Well, I
Sounds
got
like we would have got
close.
on well. Mm.
I got close. I met his son.
Okay.
I met
Did
his
he
son
talk
in,
much about it?
oh, yes, he did. 2024, he was 3 weeks off turning 100, sharp as a razor, very acerbic wit. He was actually his father's greatest critic.
Mm.
Um, when he read drafts of this book as I was writing it, he goes, "Oh, Daniel, I've got to change my opinion about my dad because I thought he was just a lazy no-hoper, and now I realise how wrong I was."
Okay. So what gave him that impression? What happened after the
So
war?
he's born in 1924. Dexter's already in his mid 40s. After the war, Dexter kind of thought, he actually wrote to his wife at the start of the war, I don't know how I can return to civilian ministry after all this amongst men. He
Mm-hmm.
really enjoyed being a minister to men, you know.
Yeah.
And then going home to drink cups of tea with old ladies, he kind of like, oh no. So he decided to be a soldier settler. He bought a farm,
Okay.
except he was one of the world's worst farmers.
Yep.
He had no eye for livestock at all. He bought a farm that was boggy and like the soil was rich, but it was sour with wetness. It was underwater for half of winter and then bone dry during the drought in summer. He inherited stock, including a cow that was just an absolute nightmare to milk. It had every fault you could imagine in a milking cow.
Yep.
He sold it. He arrives back on the farm 3 months later, proudly leading the replacement cow. And his son looks at it and goes, Dad, you bought Annie back? He hadn't recognised it. He'd bought the cow that he'd sold. And he goes, no, I wouldn't. I'd never do that. And he lets go of the halter, and Annie walks straight into its old bale in the milking shed. He had he had no gift at all for farming, and he had no luck with weather, with disease. Disease wiped out all his pigs. It killed half his chickens. His crops failed because they rotted in the rain or wilted in the sun. And after 4 years, he just can't keep his family alive. By now, he's got 5 kids. And so he goes back to the Anglican ministry. So the first 50 years of his life is just one adventure after another. And there are potential adventures in there as well. At one stage, it's thought that he tried to join the expedition, Scott's expedition to Antarctica.
Okay.
It's also believed that he tried to join several record-making flights from Britain to Australia or America to Australia. He thought, heck, I'm a navigator, I'll be useful. But unfortunately, he was short, tubby, solid guy, and of course, not the ideal weight for the planes in those days that had very marginal power to weight ratios. Yeah. So this sense of adventure, when he realises, I've got to keep my family alive, we're coming up to the years of the Great Depression. Yeah. He just goes back to little country parishes where he leads an incredibly quiet, routine, mundane life. But he's investing in his kids. He's making sure they get the best start in life they can. It's obviously a stable, happy home. The kids make tremendous fun together, as they did in rural places back before there was radio and television and computer games. They make their own fun. He sends them to good quality schools. They eventually move to Lara, just outside Geelong, and he becomes a teacher at Lara while still a minister.
Okay.
He also tries to become a writer. He writes his memoirs, and one of them actually gets published in London, the memoirs of his earliest years at sea. But he writes other memoirs, which his family, after he died, just published for the family. But I got to read them, and they're wonderful. They were terrific sources for what his life was like. But you see, this is the era in which his kids come to know him. And they know he's this legendary figure because you just go down to the RSSILA, the forerunner of the RSL,
yep.
and everybody wants to shake his hand. Melbourne, Geelong, doesn't matter where he goes, they just want to be with Padre Dexter. But they don't see anything extraordinary. They see a humdrum pastor in his dirty clothes, cleaning the chook yard and fixing stuff in the shed, taking services for 20 people in this little rural church and 40 People in that little rural church. And they think, this guy's lost it. He's a nice guy, but he's lost it.
Yeah, it's okay.
In fact, in fact, he's never lost his sense of adventure. And the minute most of the kids have left home, he tries to get back into it. World War II breaks out. He puts his hand up to be sent to Germany as the chaplain for British civilian internees in Germany.
Okay.
And he bugs his mates from World War I, who are now high-ranking officers in the Australian Army or government ministers. For over a year, he's pestering them, saying, Send me over. I might be 65, but I'm fit. I'm youthful in spirit. I know what's required. And of course, they know that actually he's not up to it.
Yep.
So they send his request through all the bureaucracy and red tape, and it gets lost somewhere in there, and he doesn't go. After the
Okay.
war, he dreams of getting a sailing ship and sailing to New Caledonia with a cargo and bringing his daughter back, who was working over there. So he never lost that excitement, that desire for adventure. He just reined it in. And I guess in my mind, that's probably him at his most heroic, where he sacrifices his dreams
Yep.
for the benefit of his family.
Yep. Oh, that sounds good. So, what was his final years like?
He he continued his ministry in Melbourne during World War II because they were short of ministers. So many ministers were going off to be chaplains.
Yep.
So he didn't retire until he was 74. And he only had 3 years in retirement. He was still in pretty good shape. In fact, the evening before he died, he was up and down a ladder fixing the spouts on the guttering of his house. And sometime during that night, on his 77th birthday, he died.
Okay. Just of old age or
Yeah, I think his
just,
heart gave out.
just it? Okay. Well, that's the way to go. Probably the way he
Yeah,
deserved to go. Yeah.
yep.
Yeah. Okay. He's a very interesting bloke. I've never actually heard of him, and which kind of
Yeah,
highlights the problem. If somebody like me's never heard of him, then it's not surprising that most other people haven't. So, which then the question is then,
exactly. I,
yeah,
I, I guess that's one of my roles as a historian is to bring some of these stories that deserve to be told. And he's just one of a number where I'm saying, why don't we know these guys? You know, we know Simpson and his donkey.
yep,
We know Jacker and we know Monash, but these are men. You know, Dexter was known right across the entire AIF. This other chaplain I wrote about, by the end of the war, he was considered the most famous soldier, not chaplain, the most famous soldier in the whole AIF. And he was a legend right across Australia. He couldn't go anywhere in Australia without being mobbed. He was that well known back home. We haven't heard of him.
yeah, yeah. They just sort of fall out of the memory in
Yeah,
behind the
and
legend,
and
I suppose.
and exactly that. How do you fit a, a, a Christian clergyman into the ANZAC legend? And
Yeah,
I think we need to go. Hang on, the ANZAC legend is big enough for these kind of men.
yeah, yeah. I mean, he epitomises all the Anzac qualities, really, doesn't he? It just
His daughter wrote
he,
about him. His daughter wrote of him. I don't know whether he was a larrikin or a hero. And my conclusion is, what's the contradiction? He was both.
yeah, give me both. Yep.
He he loved subverting authority in order to get what the ordinary soldiers needed. So there's the larrikin,
Yeah.
and you can't doubt his heroism. By the way, there was one bit I didn't mention. He also won a civilian medal for life saving during a shipwreck.
Okay. When was
This
that?
is a guy 4 times decorated for courage.
Yeah. Wow, that's got to be some sort of record.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, very interesting. Um, okay. So yeah, to get the story out there, where can people find your book?
Any good bookshop should have it. If they don't have it, they can order it in. And you can also get it online through all the usual outlets. But
Yeah, through.
seriously, it should be in all good bookshops. It's being distributed right across Australia.
Yeah, fantastic. So, okay. Well, thank you for taking your time and telling us about Walter. It's a very interesting story. So, hopefully, we'll get some more people to find out about him and other people of his kind.
Yeah, look, I appreciate this opportunity to talk because I think it is an amazing story. I mean, you couldn't make this stuff up.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. I
If
mean,
you,
you give him 50 years of adventure and then you give him 25 years of absolutely nothing. Who would dream up that story, you know?
yeah,
And
yeah,
yet he's a real person and he had such an impact.
yeah. Oh, it's very good. We'll do what we can to get his story out there.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.